Hello again. It cannot be denied that 40 or 50 years ago, there really was a good deal of racial prejudice to be found in this country. Now, one needs to hunt for it, and unless you do so, you are unlikely to come across it. This is odd, though, because although there is only a tiny fraction of the racism about them was once the case, it is these days the theme of general conversation, something which people talk about all the time. Why is this? Why are so many people so determined to demonstrate that racism is still a menace to be tackled, when it will very likely fade away of its own accord if people stop making such a song and dance about it? How do we know that racism is not the powerful force it once was? Well, take the strong objections which were once voiced by many people in this country to the idea of mixed marriages, those between black people and white. In 1983, between 50 and 60% of white people in Britain would have minded a lot or a little if a close relative married somebody of a different ethnic group. By 2013, fewer than 25% felt this way, and now the figure is about half that. In other words, 40 years ago, the majority of people in this country had a strong prejudice regarding this matter, and now almost 90% don't care. It is the same in all kinds of other fields, from employment and education to leisure and social life. Racial prejudice is running at lower levels every year, and just as with attitudes towards mixed marriages, it's very much a minority view these days. It's declining every year. This is bad news for some people, though. I'm not referring so much to those who are making a tidy living out of the business, the diversity and inclusion crowd, and all the other race grifters, although they would, of course, be out of work if the truth were to be acknowledged. I'm talking about the professionals who find racism such a useful explanation because it stops them having to think seriously and address problems which might prove awkward and embarrassing were you to take racism out of the equation. This is why, although all the awful trappings of racism have vanished from British society, things like the refusal to rent rooms to black people, discrimination in employment and education and so forth, random attacks by gangs of white youths on Asians and black people, all the things that were really common in the 1960s and 1970s, the casual use of racist language which would pass without remark, people using all sorts of offensive terms. Despite all that having vanished, we are still assured that racism is rife. It has to be hunted out these days, though, in the form of so-called microaggressions, which nobody even notices, together with the vague concept of systemic racism. The reason that there is such a marked reluctance to allow racism to die out is that opposition to racism has mutated into what amounts to a pseudoscience. One of the hallmarks of a pseudoscientific belief is that such things very often explain everything which is observed. So it is with the idea of modern racism. Why is the infant mortality rate among babies of Pakistani heritage in Britain twice that of white babies? It's racism on the part of midwives and other medical staff. Why are there so many black men in prison? Racism by police officers and judges. Why are so many black men sectioned under the Mental Health Act? Racist psychiatrists. Why do black pupils not do as well at their A-levels as white ones? Racist teachers. The concept of systemic or institutional racism can be brought into play, and in this way nobody has to think too hard about what is really going on. If once it was admitted that racism is now running at a fraction of the levels that it was in the 1970s, then it would not be so useful for explaining all these difficult problems. It is for this reason that while racism does still exist in this country, in small measure, it is grossly exaggerated, and efforts made to seek out racism in pastimes such as hiking or fishing. You have to go looking for racism these days. It's not obvious, it's not lying around openly where it once was. It would present a serious problem if the true and very low levels of racial prejudice in Britain were to be accepted. It really is too useful to too many people for it to be abandoned.